Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In today's lecture, we are going to talk about rituals in sociological theory. This lecture is part of the series on sociology of religion. Now, we know that all of us have been part of some rituals all our life. From the day that we are born and from the time that we die, our life is surrounded by rituals. Now, many of us, in common sense, do not understand why these rituals are performed or why we have to be a part of it. In sociology, a number of sociologists and anthropologists have tried to understand the meaning of rituals, and this understanding is based on a number of ethnographic studies done in different parts of the society. So let us today understand how rituals have been conceptualized in sociology, specifically in sociology of religion. So a number of individuals, right from the evolutionary theory to, say, symbolic interactionism, structuralist, have tried to conceptualize rituals. It is one of the key concepts in understanding religion. Now, when we look into the way in which it has been used in sociology or anthropology, it has been used with reference to two contexts, or it refers to two different set of activities. The first is strictly in the sphere of religious activities. So, ritual means any activity or a range of activity like prayer, ceremonial worship, chanting a mantra, a range of gestures, movements. All these activities are related to sacred objects. Now, what are sacred objects? Sacred objects are things which are of greater importance in social life, and we need to give it a higher status, respect it, and it's different from everyday mundane life. Therefore, sacred objects are kind of a connect with spiritual communication, with spiritual being, and something which is kind of a supernatural power or a invisible source which kind of regulates social life. So, every religion we see a number of religious activities are part of it, whether we talk about Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Sikh, any religion. There are a number of activities like early morning going to the place of worship, or as in Hinduism wearing a tika, or kind of putting some amount of tilak on the forehead. Going to a Gurudwara, we need to kind of wear a certain kind of scarf. So every religion has certain kind of activities which are kind of also an indication of the religious identity. Now, when these things are performed with the help of a sacred object in a religious space, it is referred as ritual. So this is one meaning. The second meaning in anthropology and sociology is to refer to a set of activities that are associated with individual life cycle. So as we move from our life, say we from birth to adolescence, say getting married, or kind of funeral rituals, we see the entire life cycle. There is a movement from one stage to the other, and every stage has a set of rituals. So at the time of the birth, we know in a number of communities we have rituals associated with birth. So these rituals are associated with our individual life cycle. So all this kind of helps us to demarcate one position or one stage of our life from the other. So we have heard about initiation rites. Initiation rites which helps individual move from childhood to adulthood. Evans Pritchard, Malinowski, Ratley Brown, they have all been referring to initiation rite as significant in making individual recognize the responsibility in society. So in sociology, the rituals which are associated with the life cycle of individual are referred as rites of passage. So there are two significant meaning of ritual. One, activities associated with a particular religion. Number two, the rituals which are taking part at different stage of individual life cycle. Now let us look at some of the theories which has helped us to make sense of what ritual is. So we first go to the evolutionary theories. So all of us who are students of sociology know that the evolutionary theories were basically talking about the change from one stage to the other. This was kind of the initial attempt by anthropologists to understand the nature of social change taking place. So most of the 19th century sociologists and anthropologists, when they were trying to understand religion, they were trying to help us see how much of change is taking place. So two important names which comes in when we understand evolutionary theory is James Frazer and Edward Tylor. Tylor's book, The Primitive Culture, and James Frazer's book, The Golden Bough. Both of these work are trying to help us understand the behavior, ritual behavior. And these two theorists would place religion or rituals in terms of evolving, how society is progressing. So when they discussed the behavior, they identified and designated what was kind of called the world of rituals. And in this context, they considered ritual as the first stage of evolution. So in the evolutionary plane, we know they were trying to locate the three things which kind of are considered as bringing about a change in society. So the evolutionary theories, they try to understand magic, religion and science. And the argument was that as society was progressing, it was moving from magic to religion to science. Now these anthropologists were trying to understand the non-Western society. So a dichotomous understanding was made between the so-called Western modern society, where rationality had occurred, reformation has taken place, and this was contrasted to the primitive society who was seen as having a larger belief in magic and religion. So the practices of the primitive society was recognized by Tylor as magico-religious. Now, what does the term magico-religious means? It means that each of these activities that these primitive people were performing had the component of both magic and religion, and they were kind of considered as lacking the rational scientific knowledge. So the argument was, since they were not able to scientifically explain a phenomena, they were taking recourse to magico-religious activities. And in that context, what was happening in everyday society was related to nature, to animism, or to the soul, spirits and the dreams. So the original state, according to the evolutionary theory, was referred as the magic or the pre-religious stage. Tylor would kind of consider it as animistic stage. Animistic in the sense that why certain things happened, why it started raining or why there was a thunder. They did not have an explanation to it. So they thought that it was because the dead were annoyed or the ancestors were annoyed, and therefore rituals were offered to appease the dead and the unseen. That is why it is considered as being closer to the animism. Tylor defined ritual as practices in the animistic stage that are highly emotive, expressive to the point of being dramatic, non-rational, and rooted in magical belief. He placed a strong emphasis on magic and magical practices as the foundation through which ritual were evolved. So, according to Tyler, magic practices served as the first stable institutional foundation for the emergence of society. And that is why, as society would develop, they would move from magic to religion, and by the time science and rational thinking comes in, it would be replaced by scientific thought. The need to give rise to what Tyler called animism was the manifestation of magico-religious behavior. Now, when we look into Fraser, in his Golden Bough, he says that the practices of the primitive people was pseudoscience. Why is it he calling it as pseudoscience? Is because he was under the belief that primitive people could not have a scientific, rational explanation of human reality. So these were the evolutionists who were kind of looking into the three domain of magic, religion and science as evolving at the changes taking place in society. After the evolutionist, we have the functionalist. So the 19th century evolutionists were criticized. Why were they criticized? Because they were putting too much of emphasis on the origin of religion and ritual. In the 20th century, scholars like Emil Durkheim, Malinowski, Evans Pritchard and others, they tried to kind of shift the attention. Now, the attention was not in terms of origin or evolution, but the understanding was to trace the function that these rituals did for the maintenance of the society. And that is why the approach was known as functional theory. The most prominent anthropologist or sociologist to understand rituals from a functional perspective is Emil Durkheim and Malinowski. They used the functional inquiry to understand the division between the sacred and the profane. Now, the objective was to understand which is more sacred and which is more profane. So, Durkheim says that the entire universe can be divided into the sacred and profane, and he attributed religion to the domain of sacred and others into the domain of profane. Now, when we look into Emil Durkheim in his work, The Elementary Form of Religious Life, he developed a theory of religion based on the dichotomy of sacred and profane. And according to Durkheim, all religious practices and beliefs was serving the purpose for the community that adheres to them. So for Durkheim, religion was a source of solidarity. So in his kind of theory, when there is a shift from mechanical solidarity to organic solidarity, religion continues to bind the people. So he was kind of looking into ritual as integrative. It was performing the function of integrating the society. Durkheim used the Arunta tribesmen of Western Australia as an example to understand religious ceremony of worship. And from naturism to animism, he kind of arrived at the most simple form of religion as totemism. So totemism was kind of symbolic of community worship. Totemism was kind of considered as the most original and the simplest form of religion according to Durkheim. Durkheim posed a relationship between ritual behavior and the adherence of social order. So he was kind of concerned about the collective consciousness. And how do we arrive at a collective consciousness? The sense of belonging to a community. And what is symbolic of that community? It is the totem, which is kind of part of every individual in a clan. So he said that this collective behavior or integration of the society is possible because of religion, because of the rituals being at the heart of the theory of social solidarity. Rituals are organized around sacred object. So if we read his book, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life, he kind of argues that the sacred and the profane are in a relation of opposition, and they should have been kept separated. Now, what does the rituals do? The rituals are able to maintain the distinction between the sacred and profane, because he says that because of contagiousness of the sacred, the profane has a tendency to come close to the sacred. Now, how do we retain the sacredness? It is through the rituals of taking bath, of kind of doing purifying rituals, and so on. So the fundamental source of Durkheim's religion was the collective conscience, and this collective consciousness provides individual with meaning that bind them into a community. So for Durkheim, society was the God, and that is why the ritual was to give more significance to the social order. Participation in rituals was that symbolic that the society was integrated. So rituals performed the function of maintaining the social order. Following Durkheim, we see Talcott Parson worked upon the theory of Durkheim, and he was trying to tell us the meaning of ritual within his theory of social system. Parson observed that rituals are human practices within the realm of sacred that are characterized by the essential, non-rational or transcendental nature. What does he mean by this? Parson meant that unlike human rational behavior that occurs within a mean-end relationship, that is, if you look into an economic relation, so you kind of always have the relationship of mean and end, that you do a certain action with the purpose of making profit. So that's a rational action, that there is a rational end to an action. When we look into religion, religion is not an means to an end. Ritual behavior exists outside the mean-end relationship. Rather, Parsons says that religion or rituals are end in themselves. So this is kind of very close to what Durkheim meant when he says that we kind of follow the practices of society not because it is of any individual benefit, but because of the larger social order. Another functionalist who talks about rituals is Malinowski. Now, his research was among the Trobriand Islanders, and the book is known as Agronauts of Western Pacific. Now, this work marks the foundation of the functionalist approach to the study of religion. Like Durkheim, Malinowski's theory of ritual is based on the idea that rituals serve a social purpose for the community in which they are performed. He critiqued Tyler's claim that rituals are outcome of prehistoric man's rational attempt to make sense of mysterious and illogical. So Malinowski in his work Magic, Science, Religion and Science basically kind of comes up with the understanding that it is incorrect to say that the primitive did not have a rational thought. The rituals of the Trobriand Islanders were not the result of speculation or lack of intellectual development. So in his work, he gives examples of everyday life like canoe building, gardening, growing of yams, which are part of everyday life of the Trobrianders. And he argues that it is not that they don't have any rational thought and they are doing it just out of irrational past experiences, but the fact that they are able to produce a good amount of yam which is sufficient for the community, it is evident that they have a sense of the season, of the time of sowing, the quality of soil, and the other aspect. So the people of Trobriand were quite adept at separating the actions that are regarded as magical and those which are regarded as belonging to the realm of science and technology. So they were able to differentiate between the three. According to Malinowski, all rituals are performed at the time of emotional distress. But unlike magical rites, rituals which are part of the religion are not expected to bring about clearly definable or direct results. So Malinowski was not of the opinion that it is evolving one after the other. Rather, he shows in his work that the three can coexist, but yet they have a different function. So before the canoe building was done, both magic and religion was performed, and they had this sense of the symmetry of the airline structure of a boat that would allow it to sail in water, and therefore it was a coexisting of the three thought which was there in the Trobriand Islander. Now, after looking into the evolutionary theory, the functional theory, the third theory which kind of conceptualized rituals is the structuralist perspective. Now, the structuralist approach kind of emphasizes not to be reduced to social function. So, while the functionalist was saying that rituals have a function in society. So, Durkheim says it functions to maintain order. Malinowski says it helps us to maintain the emotional psychic blend of the people. The structuralists are more interested in analyzing the symbolic expression that are part of the structures of the society, and the carrying out rituals are kind of indicative of the logic of primitive mind, and it is an attempt to make sense of the unknowable. The structuralist argued that the division of the world into the sacred and the profane is consistent with structural rule that primitive mind used to name and categorize the world. Sacred and profane was considered as binary opposite that result from the unconscious structuring of reality. An important structuralist who kind of gives us a comprehensive understanding of ritual is Edmund Leach. Leach defined rituals as culturally oriented behavioral pattern which seek to make a sense of a symbolic statement about the relationship between human society and the supreme being. In bringing out the significance of this symbolic statement, Edmund Leach points out that they were derived from the group's cultural life. So, by trying to understand ritual, he is kind of helping us understand the relationship between the individual and the religious ideology, whether it could be a belief in the deity or a supernatural force. So, the rituals are helping us to create a relationship, a structure between two kind of agency. So, Leach, like Durkheim, emphasized the close relationship between society and religion in the domain of religious practices. The next sociologist to talk about ritual is Robert Merton. Robert Merton treated ritual as a learned pattern of behavior which is not effective, does not lead to the realization of any aims, and is only maintained because it fulfills a need to reduce fear of the unknown. So he is kind of giving us a different understanding from a functional perspective. He's giving us a more negative context. That rituals is an expression of social deviation. He uses the term ritualism and says the ritualism occurs when a person rejects the normative goal of the society, but nevertheless continues to participate in the means of attaining them. So ritualism is kind of found in bureaucracy, found in political ritualism, economic ritualism. So it kind of ritualism is a structural quality which emerges because the norms are there, but individual cannot place himself or herself within the structures of the norm. There is a conflict between the norms and culturally described objective. So when we have so much of bureaucratic rules, individual can boycott the rule in order to achieve his goal. In political ritualism, we go and do the voting despite the fact that we believe the system is kind of out of place and nothing is kind of being positive about it. So there's a kind of a negativity in terms of the dysfunctions of society. So when we look into these theories, we see how significant the contribution has been to make sense of what the rituals are. There could be different kinds of rituals: rites of passage, calendrical rites of exchange and communion, rites of affliction, rites of feasting, fasting and festival, and also political life. So through this lecture, we see that our life is kind of full of rituals, and when we make sense of through sociological theories, it helps us to make sense of the reality as whole. So the references would be all a part of this lecture. It is always advantageous to read the original classical text. So Durkheim, The Elementary Forms of Religious Life; Malinowski, The Agronauts of Western Pacific, his second book, Magic, Religion and Science; Talcott Parson, The Social System. So if we read this original book, we will have a good sense of what sociologists have contributed for understanding rituals. With this, I come to an end of today's lecture. Thank you.